So I will say welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining the Tennessee Valley Wild Ones tonight. And we have Lyn and Scotty here to talk about native garden maintenance for the winter. And I'm just going to turn it straight over and let them have at it. Thank you guys for doing this.
Yes, of course. I really like this idea of the roundtable discussions, just being a more informal, open discussion kind of program. So that, yeah, we kind of designed this for folks that are new to native gardening or, yeah, just beginner gardeners in general. And it's a little less formal than our monthly presentations, but if anyone is new to Wild Ones, this is our local chapter of a national organization, and it's all volunteer run. And we advocate for protecting native plant communities and using native plants in the horticultural trade. So yeah, check out our other programs. We've got a great newsletter too, and consider becoming a member. So yeah, I'm Lyn, and I work for the city of Chattanooga, and I take care of green infrastructure plantings, which are mostly native, but I also help with kind of general land management stuff for the city. So I work with parks a lot. I work with the city forester a lot. And I have been doing different kind of gardening throughout my career for a while now. Some fancy pants, formal kind of ornamental gardening before I moved to Chattanooga, and then a lot of work with natives and a lot of habitat restoration work and wildlands conservation, stuff like that. And I'll let Scotty introduce himself a little bit.
Hey everyone, my name is Scottie Smith. I am the Director of Land Conservation at Reflection Writing. And our mission at Reflection Writing is pretty much the same thing as Wild Ones. Our mission is definitely centered around promoting biodiversity. And my job, that is conservation of land, especially at Reflection Writing and throughout Chattanooga. We do a lot of invasive species removal. So that's a big step in promoting native biodiversity. We also do habitat restoration. We do research on the property. We do a lot of education too with all this. And we also have a native plant nursery on site at Reflection. So if any of you haven't been there, come check us out. We'll be closing up. I think the 28th is going to be our last day this month that we'll be open. But we're open Tuesday through Saturday from 9 to 3. So if you want to come check out, get some plants, and then we'll be closed Thanksgiving and Black Friday. But if you haven't been out to see us, come check us out.
Fantastic. Did we want to do any other announcements before we kind of get into the meat of our discussion here? Any other Wild One stuff? We've got a holiday party in December, and generally monthly programming coming down the pipe. But
generally, we have a holiday party. In these COVID days, we are not gathering.
We're not gathering in person. That's
yeah. So yeah, so we have talks that I don't know if are formalized yet about a book club discussion for December. Right. That'll be the second Monday, and you can look at the website or the Facebook page or newsletter to get the information on that. And then we will have one in January as well, a program in January as well. Other announcements?
Yes, I wanted to have the book announcement today, but by next week I'll select a book for the book club discussion.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, so Scotty and I got together and talked about just generally what we would say is kind of what we're up to in the fall and winter, taking care of our sites and the land that we manage. But we also just want to kind of open this up for discussion and try to answer folks' questions. So we hope folks brought questions, but we will kind of list off some basic topics that we're ready to cover. So just get the ball rolling, get people's gears turning. So yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing and we can see each other's faces, which might be easier for discussion. I will say one caveat: we can't generally answer super specific site questions about your property. It's really hard to do that without seeing your land. But if you think it's a question that will help others, if you think a lot of people probably struggle with the same thing, that's exactly what we're trying to talk about tonight. So yeah, we can raise hands, or you can type things in the chat box. So if you haven't opened your participants panel, you hover your cursor at the bottom of your screen and you'll see participants and then another icon that says chat. And if you click those, you'll open up a panel on the side of your screen. And you can, like I said, you can either type your questions and we'll see those and answer those, or you can raise your hand. This is a pretty small group, so we could actually we could probably go to the even more informal of just saying, hey, this is so-and-so, like Bill did a second ago. So I'm gonna just kind of read through what some of the topics are that Scotty and I discussed talking about, and if it leaps out as you as like, yeah, I want to learn more about that, then just please go ahead and start talking. We thought we could talk about pruning. It's a good time of year for pruning. It's a great time of year for a lot of different invasive species. It's a good time to work on invasives. This is a great time of year for a lot of different planting projects. A lot of people don't think about the fall as a good time of year to plant, but it's definitely a good time, and even better for some things. We wanted to talk about leaves. We wanted to talk about managing your water on your site and looking at moisture in the winter. This is a great time of year to think about different building projects, mulching projects, and also, yeah, just planning for next year and reading and researching what you want to do next year. And yeah, did I leave anything out, Scotty? I can't actually see our document.
I think you got most of it. You know, protect your irrigation from freezing, mulching. You can still do some planting over the winter. The winters here are so mild. Definitely can still be putting in trees and shrubs and stuff into the ground. But I think you covered most of it.
Okay, great. Well, is anybody saying, me, I want to talk about XYZ, then please just go ahead and raise your voice, because I don't think we even need to do the official hand raising kind of thing. But if not, we'll just start chatting.
I'd love to hear a little bit about invasive management. This is Nora. And I had read an article recently in, I think it was the North Creek Nurseries newsletter, talking about pulling some invasive weeds this time of year, the warm season or spring invasives, things that pop up then, things like henbit and things where you'll see some basil leaves on some of those spring weeds. So I'd love to hear what y'all have to say about that. Thanks.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, Nora.
So invasives in general, but then also weeding, like hand weeding kind of work, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah, great question. So there's tons of, there's still a lot of hand weeding work to do in the winter. A lot of people, you know, growth does slow down, but there's still a lot of winter annuals to watch out for in your little planting beds. Something that took me a little while to learn when I was starting out as a gardener was, the importance of actually identifying your weeds can really help save time if you figure out that it's an annual, like probably I think what you're referring to, henbit. That's a plant I wouldn't spend very much time worrying about getting the roots, for example, and mostly you're trying to prevent that from going to seed. So weeding strategy is kind of like opened up my mind when I realized you didn't have to get all the roots of every single weed. That annuals are something you could chop up with a hoe, or you could just knock down with a cultivator and then mulch over that, maybe, depending on the site. Sometimes you can weed whack stuff like that if it's not right near other delicate plants. What was that?
There is a strategy that if it is an annual, you're better off not pulling it up, because when you pull it up and disturb the soil, you can get erosion. You also can uncover more seed. So if you know it's an annual, you just want to get it before it goes to seed.
Absolutely. So yeah, that some folks would say even when it's a perennial, you should try to not disturb the soil. And I practice that as well. Even if it's something with a really deep, like kind of taprooty structure, like a dandelion, or something that's kind of rhizomatous and it's right on the surface. Those are all things to take into account when you're figuring out how to deal with that weed. But yeah, when you disturb the soil, you may churn up more annual weeds that germinate really quickly. So yeah, those are all good points.
What about Vinca?
Yeah, Vinca is an excellent invasive to work on in the winter because it's evergreen. So there's Vinca minor and Vinca major are both really common invasives around here. I would also add Euonymus winter creeper, Euonymus fortunae, English ivy, privet, honeysuckle bush. Those all stand out in the winter to me, and they can be easier to find if you're managing like a big site. You can they stand out when all the leaves are off your trees otherwise. So sorry, I'm being interrupted. Could you mute? Yeah, that's one that I would actually try to roll up like a carpet. It's really great fun sometimes actually to get down on the ground and do that by hand. So that's not one I would recommend trying to spray. I don't generally recommend using herbicide anyway. I try to use it as little as I can. But I haven't seen a whole lot of luck for people spraying that anyway. So that's a great one to pull by hand in the winter. Yeah, and Bill brought up another great point. In the winter time, since a lot of stuff is dormant and there's a lot more rain, erosion is something you should really think about and try to manage more in the winter when you're doing any kind of work, whether it's hand weeding or you're going to dig out a big old shrub and disturb a lot of soil. That's something I try to be even more careful about in the winter because things are growing more slowly and the neighboring plants nearby are not going to stabilize the soil that you disturb as quickly as they would in the spring or summer. You got anything to add, Scotty? Or
yeah, so there's over the winter, there is, if you are going to use herbicide, there's going to be a few differences between using an herbicide in the winter and during the summer. You're going to be limited where you're not going to be doing near as much foliar spraying. You definitely want warmer temperatures if you are going to be doing that. Wait for good conditions, you know, in the afternoon when it's above 50 degrees to do any kind of foliar spraying. But there's not much out there you're going to be doing that on. And I wouldn't recommend doing that much in the winter anyways. But what you can do if you have a whole bunch of privet or bittersweet or anything like that, during the winter, still a good time as long as it's, you know, above freezing to do cut stump applications. And I agree with Lyn. I don't like to use herbicide whenever possible, but sometimes, you know, depending on the location and how bad the infestation is, I think it can actually be less environmental harm using an herbicide appropriately than actually pulling all those invasives up by the roots. Because if you have, you know, 20 privets on your yard or whatever, and you rip those up, that can be a lot of soil erosion, a lot of soil loss right there. But instead, a little bit of concentrated cut stump spray on those can kill them even in the winter and be a lot less damage overall.
And if you leave their stumps right, it will help keep that bank or that area stable until you can plant.
Yes.
So if you don't have, like if you're in December and January and you can't literally plant at that period in time for whatever reason, then that will keep you stable until you are ready to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point on steep slopes in particular. It can be nice to have those dead stumps still in place, just rotting in place. And for anybody that hasn't heard of cut stump method, that would be a different way to use herbicide. Generally, people hear about a foliar application. They buy their like ready mixed stuff, and it it says just to coat the leaves of plants. If you're doing cut stump, that's when you use a higher concentration of the active ingredient, and you would use that for, like Scotty said, a bigger woody shrub, and you would cut it as close to the ground as possible, hopefully no more than just a couple of inches off the ground, and then you would treat that surface area of the stump as quickly as possible, like within seconds, with your concentrated active ingredient. So like Scotty was saying, that's a lot more targeted. You're a lot less likely to accidentally spray some beneficial insects or hit other plants by accident. So a lot of folks prefer cut stump method to a foliar application. And if you think about trying to treat Vinca, for example, which like covers the ground, that would be a large area to try and coat all those leaves. And I've seen people try to do kudzu with a foliar application, and that's just crazy. I mean, it's sprawled out over trees and shrubs, and you end up getting a lot of non-target damage, which is really a shame.
Can I ask you a question about Japanese honeysuckle, because it got a lot of that, and it some of it is green now still, but what's the best method for removing, killing that invasive?
Are you talking about the vine or the shrubs?
The vine.
Yeah, that would be another one that I would do by hand. Generally, it's not. So sometimes you can find like a pretty big woody, woody structure coming on the ground that you could treat with cut stump method. But a lot of times I feel like that stuff just pulls right out for me, especially if the soil is a little wetter. In the summer, sometimes the soil gets so dry that the plants are really hard to pull. They're just like hanging in there. So I find that wetter fall and winter is actually kind of a lot easier pulling stuff like that. But yeah, I think of honeysuckle vine as being kind of similar to kudzu in that sometimes there's a preliminary step of kind of gathering it all up. You know what I mean? So like finding the epicenter and then like getting all of the radiating vines and figuring out, did I get every epicenter, or all of these sprawling vines coming from another spot that I missed. So that's if you're being really thorough.
Yeah, I would agree. I think anything that you can physically pull up by hand, I would go ahead and pull it up by hand. And then if you can't get it up by hand, that's when you want to do the cut stump application, especially if it's a bigger stem. And generally with that at Reflection Writing, we use a 50% glyphosate mix. Glyphosate's the active ingredient in Roundup. So it'll be 50% glyphosate and 50% just water. And that generally does the trick. But we only do that when we can't pull it up by hand, or if there's so much to pull up by hand that it causes too much soil disturbance, in which case we like to do the concentrated spray, because that's just one little half squirt on top of that stem, and that's all it's going to take, and it'll kill it.
You can also use a paintbrush to apply it to when you're not trying to do it in mass like Reflection Writing on 300 plus acres. Yeah, it's very easy in a home landscape to use a paintbrush or a dauber of some kind.
Yeah.
Spray bottle, just like a little
Yeah.
cleaning bottle.
Before we leave that, Bill has his hand up.
What's up, Bill?
Well, this is a different topic. We had
Okay.
rain and driving wind, which blew the leaves off the trees. Starting the beginning of December, the nasty cities are going to go around with the leaf sucker machine. So between now and December 1st, I highly recommend that you go out and you gather up all the leaves that your neighbors have piled up and put a big pile, because I found that the leaves not chewed up or chopped up. I used to mow them down, but there's not much left when you do that. If you take the leaves and put them in a pile, they'll kind of settle down to mass, and it's much more effective at keeping weeds down. And any kind of mulch I've had is way better than wood chips, way better than pine straw. And of course, once you chip up the leaves, there's nothing left. So that's, gone immediately. But oak leaves, nice clean oak leaves, will last the whole season. And then the next year you put it on, you've fertilized your crops. Plus you keep the water from evaporating. It's really been very, very effective for water retention and keeping weeds down. And now is your time to get it for free. Only pick the good ones though. Some leaf piles have a lot of weeds. You want to get nice clean oak leaves.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the conversations I have with my neighbors when I ask them if I can have their leaves. I think it's a great conversation starter about sustainable landscaping practices kind of in general. But yeah, I feel like it's crazy that people throw away their leaves, because I use them for so much around my property. I use them for building compost and my vegetable patch. But yeah, you can use them like mulch in your flower beds. If you have a lot of lawn and you feel like your leaves are really smothering your lawn grass, you can mow them. But a lot of people don't like to do that because there are so many insects that make their home in the leaf litter on the ground. And they provide a lot of habitat over the winter for a lot of different pollinators, but also just tons of different bugs.
I'll even use them in my pots, like where I have pots of plants. I'll just take the leaves, man. That's my mulch for those. So yeah, it works great.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the last thing you want to do is throw away your leaves. Like, do not bag them up and put them on the street to throw away. That's just stealing from your yard. Everything that they said. And then if you really if you got to have your grass and you like your grass, and you don't like the leaves on the grass, you can still mow them in. That's way better than bagging them up and getting rid of your yard. They do decompose a lot faster, but your grass, it'll actually help your grass out. It's building topsoil. So just whatever you do, don't get rid of your leaves. If you have to mow them in, the best thing to do is just leave them be. You could also rake them up and put them in your garden if you want. And then compost. If there's extra, just put them in your compost or just pile them up in the corner of the yard. If you still have too many and you want to condense that compost pile a little bit, you can chop it up again. That'll break it down faster. But you can't get any better compost than a good leaf compost. So
If after all of that you still have too many, you can bring them to Grace Episcopal Church because we use them. We actually go around the neighborhood when we when all is well and we have plenty of time. We'll go around the neighborhood for all those bagged up leaves and bring them over to the church for mulch. So yeah, if after all of that you still have too many leaves,
Yeah, give them to Christina, give them to me.
yeah.
But yeah, I will say that a really common problem I see, aside from just the shame of wasting leaves like that, is that they end up in storm drains a lot. So the storm drains out in the road are designed to whisk floodwaters away as quickly as possible and keep the roads safe. So if they get clogged up with leaves, that can create a safety hazard. So just a PSA there.
Thanks for that switch in topic. It actually answered one of the questions in our chat about whether
Yeah,
it's
it
better
did.
to leave mulch, to mulch the leaves or leave them. So
Yeah, I leave most of my leaves just where they fall.
me too, unless it hits concrete and then it goes into where, it goes off the concrete into something else.
Oh, somebody's asking about a weed wrench. Allison Hoffman. Yeah, weed wrenches are great for pulling up smaller caliper shrubs or vines, like we were talking about earlier. Great tool, one of my favorite tools.
I think Scotty and them have weed wrench parties at Reflection Riding.
yeah, we use a ton of them, especially if we have a bunch of volunteers. That's our go-to tool. Again, like when we can use the weed wrenches, we like to use that instead of herbicide. But at Reflection Riding, a lot if it's a monoculture of privet, we just can't dig up every single privet, so we'll use spray. But yeah, we use a ton of weed wrenches. They're a great tool. They can get anything up to something a couple inches in diameter, so it's very effective. I was about to look up where you could buy them. But
yeah, weed wrench is the generic name. That used to be, excuse me, that used to be the only brand you could find. But I believe that is that guy is no longer making weed wrenches. So there are other brands like Uprooter that you can buy.
yeah, I think we use Uprooter.
Yeah.
And there's different sizes too.
Yeah, I use my Uprooter Mini a lot. It's like this big.
Yeah,
And it's really handy. A lot more useful than I thought it would be. I thought it was just cute, but
On the question of weed wrenches, the Uprooter is the follow-up to the actual old weed wrench, with the capital W's. There are a lot of varieties, but in my experience, in testing and comparing, the Uprooters the best. They all come from Canada, so find a friend and try to keep the freight down. The freight's pretty expensive because it's big and heavy.
yeah. But yeah, that's a great tool. So one thing that Scotty and I were talking about earlier that it might actually be interesting to open up to the crowd. We were talking about planting this time of year, and we agreed that woody stuff is pretty great to plant this time of year. So trees, shrubs, definitely bare root would be preferable in the winter than any other time of year. But then we started talking about herbaceous stuff, plugs or other plants that are dormant in the winter. And there is some debate over whether that is a good idea. So I've heard some people say, well, I just don't want to buy herbaceous stuff in the winter because you can't tell what you're buying, right? It's dormant. You can't see it. You don't know if it's a healthy plant. But if you have stuff lying around like I do that is waiting to get in the ground, it might be tempting to plant this time of year. And you think, is this a bad idea? Am I going to stress this plant out? You know, what's wrong with planting in the fall or winter? And I honestly don't have a great answer for this. I've read, I think North Creek Nursery has a really nice newsletter, and they put out a thing talking about plugs may get kind of pushed up out of the ground in the winter when you've got a freeze thaw action going on. And they called it soil heaving. I've never seen that, but I think Scotty, you had some thoughts on that.
I mean, I don't find that I run into that issue much here. It just, the temperatures don't seem to swing that low, that hard. Last year, the soil just barely froze. I mean, the top half inch of soil might have froze last year once. I know a couple years ago, the soil did freeze for like 2 weeks out of the year. But in my opinion, I'm not too worried about, like, I think you can pretty much plant all winter long, even your herbaceous stuff. And the roots will continue to grow. It's, you know, it's a much slower rate of growth. But the main thing that I'm worried about with planting in the winter is like chipmunks and squirrels and stuff coming and digging stuff up. You know, it's a longer time for it to be sitting there, not established, you know, so there's more of a chance of a chipmunk or something coming and digging up your plants. But other than that, I haven't had really any issues at all. I'll plant all winter long. It's just the winters here are pretty mild, so we don't have frozen soil to worry about.
Yeah.
I've noticed for me, plants that really like that hot dry don't do as well with winter planting in terms of perennials. I have had less luck with that, and I don't know if it's just because of the water, like because it's so wet through the winter, or because I really feel like that's probably what it is. But yeah, some of the stuff that likes it really hot and dry, I have found doesn't go in well in the winter, but most things I've not ever had any problems with.
Yeah, I've done lots and lots of winter planting, you know, hundreds of plants. The thing that you want to watch out for, as Scotty said, is that if you have a lot of squirrels, I plant my plugs. One of them was very neat. He dug up like 20 plugs and laid them side by side. So if you put plugs in, you need to go out there and keep an eye on it. When they dig them up, you got to put them back in. Otherwise, you're going to lose your plugs. So, you know, they're looking for something to eat. Also, remember that you need when you plant your shrubs and trees, you need to pretty much bare root them or do as close as you can to it. Otherwise, you're just going to run into problems. You know, be aggressive to find the roots on them. But as Christina said, I put in 10 different grasses one year and in the winter, and 8 of them did fine, and the other 2, every one of them died. And I don't know if it was that they liked it dry or what it was, but you know, most everything works except when it doesn't. The thing I would not do is I would not buy any dormant plant. Don't do it. I have found that 50% of them are dead the next year. So let Scotty take all that risk and wait until next year to see what's come up. And it's not that somebody's trying to do you in. It's just that a lot of those dormant plants in a pot just die. And no one knows until next year when they don't come up.
Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and it may, yeah, so like you guys are saying, I have heard warm season grasses shouldn't be planted in the winter. So I've heard people get more specific about that. Just for whatever reason they just don't like it, but that's about all the guidance I've found so far.
Yeah, that'd be the one thing that I would advise against really planting too, is the warm season grasses. And I do think that's just probably has to do a lot with the rain and just, you know, rotting out. When it's established as a good deep root system, it can pull that water away.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the one thing I would really avoid planting. But most other stuff, especially if it's, you know, evergreen or somewhat evergreen, it's a great time to plant right now. Even some other stuff, you know, a lot of like spring ephemerals, not even spring ephemerals, but there's a lot of plants that just use this time of year as this is kind of their niche, like Sedum tornatum, woodland stonecrop. Like this is the time of year to plant it right now, because all the leaves fall and it's taking advantage of not having all that shade, and it'll take off all winter long. And then in the summer, it'll kind of die back and look a little bit ragged, but you know, it'll come back looking nice. But some plants are more adapted to growing this time of year than during the normal growing season too. So depends on the plant.
Yeah.
So that's probably a good place to move into. What do we do with them once we've planted them and they've grown? I know I get a lot of questions about like whether I should cut them back, when to cut them back, how to cut them back, for everything from perennials to trees.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, it's kind of a myth that you need to do like a fall cleanup and cut everything down in your garden. I do some tidying up if things have flopped over, but that's about it. I leave all that dead standing plant material up for the winter, and that's really important insect habitat. A lot of bugs are overwintering down in the hollow stems, the pith of those plants. So even if you have to cut stuff because it flopped over and it's in the way or something, I leave it on the compost pile, just in case there's some bugs in there trying to make it through the winter. I was gonna say this is a time of year when if we're cutting stuff down, like we had a bunch of flopped over Andropogon glomeratus. So that's kind of a tall, really gorgeous grass, but some of it had flopped down. It was looking a little messy. I went ahead and used those cuttings as a mulch. So there was a bare spot, kind of an eroding spot where people were walking, and I was kind of using it as mulch and kind of using it as a direct seeding activity at the same time. So when you're cutting those materials down, that's a lot of bird food too, those seeds, but it's also just seeds that you could use if you want to throw them in a new spot. So you can leave stuff in place, or if you do need to cut it down, you can use it for great stuff, garden activities. What about you, Scotty? You guys cut everything down at reflection riding in the winter?
No, I recommend leaving it all until late winter, early spring, when stuff's, you know, just about to come out. I'll trim it back just to make it look nicer. You don't necessarily have to do that. But I would definitely recommend leaving stuff. A lot of seeds are being eaten by birds and bugs. And then again, it's a lot of habitat for bugs and birds too, especially your ornamental grasses. The dead shriveled up grass, birds use that for nesting. So it's definitely important to keep all that out.
Yeah. When you have a lot of warm season grasses, I like to cut those all in March. So let them stay up almost all winter, and then in March I'll cut that stuff down for for the new growth to get that sunlight and kind of encourage that new growth to spread out.
We have another question. If planting in the fall, how often do you water? I was going to say that if I'm planting right now, in general, I'm going to water it in that first time right after I plant it, and then I don't touch it again. I planted stuff a month ago at Reflection Riding, and we watered it in that first day. We haven't touched it since. The only thing you got to watch out for is if it's not going to be raining for several weeks and there are still leaves on the plant and it's photosynthesizing, then I'd water it, make sure it's watered once every week or two. But in general, we have enough water here to where you just water it in that one time and then you're good to go. And you shouldn't have to water it again until summer if there's a drought.
Yeah, it's really nice not to have to think about watering so much.
Yeah.
So y'all doing any seed collection over at Reflection Riding? Do you guys gather stuff up this time of year?
Yeah, so this year is probably the biggest time for seed collecting for us. All the fall blooming plants have set their seed and they're still on the stem. So we do a good amount of seed collecting at this time of year, especially for the late summer fall blooming stuff, your asters and sunflowers and basically everything in the aster family. But yeah, but there's a ton of spring plants, spring ephemerals. Lots of times those seeds aren't they're ready right after they bloom in late spring, early summer, that type of thing. So it really depends on what plant you're looking at. But now is a good time to go out and collect some seeds if you haven't already. And you also want to do you can do seed processing and seed storage. That's a big thing that we do at Reflection Riding during the winter months.
And if you're lazy like me, you can collect seeds and then just throw them right on the ground. Just put them where you want those things to grow and give it a shot, and they'll get cold stratified just like they would otherwise, and maybe germinate in place, maybe not. But I don't have the facilities to do a whole lot of seed storing or a greenhouse like Scotty does. So if you're like me and you're kind of a disorganized person on top of all that and not very good at taking care of little bitty baby seedlings, you can always do a direct sow.
Actually, Lynn, I would recommend that for just about everyone. The reason we have to do the collecting and seed processing and storing is just because the amount of seeds we collect, and because we have our nursery and everything. But for your normal everyday person, I would just collect the seeds. You don't have to do really much processing at all, and just go ahead and throw them out in the yard and see what comes up. I wouldn't worry about the processing or storing or anything like that if you don't have to. It's much easier to just go ahead and throw it out there and let nature do its thing.
I tend to tuck them in my pocket and then give them away.
Nice. So Bill, what is controversial about pruning?
When to do it, how much to do it. Also, if you have a native plant, do you want to make it look like it's a manicured Japanese plant that you brought in? If we're supposed to be the native plant society and have things be natural, what's natural about changing the form of the plant?
Oh man, this is controversial. Yeah, those are great questions. Scotty, you got ideas? Feelings?
Yeah, I would say for most things, I would agree. I wouldn't do any pruning at all. The nature can take care of itself in all these scenarios, and the more we fight nature and try to manipulate nature, the more work it is for us. So I agree. I think you need to pick the proper plant for the proper location, and then you won't have to do any pruning. You shouldn't be planting a big tree right up next to your house that you're going to have to prune all the time. So that being said, I would advise not doing really any pruning. But if you are going to do pruning, late winter or any time in the winter is the best time to do it. The one exception is that if you're going to be doing heavy pruning on something that blooms in the spring, you don't want to do that because some trees set their flower buds the year before they're going to bloom, right? So like azaleas and everything they have their buds set right now. So in the spring, it'll pop up and the flowers will be there. So you don't want to prune azaleas until after they bloom or any other spring blooming plants. And you can prune them right after they bloom. But again, I would just pick the proper plant for the proper place. That way you don't have to do any pruning and it's a lot less work on you. Like with the native plants, we shouldn't be having to work so hard. You know, the whole purpose of this is more beneficial and it's less work for us and just as beautiful. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I would add that we are talking about getting a presentation together specifically about proper pruning technique. Because you do, if you need to prune, say, like Scotty was saying, if you put something too close to your house, or like I learned how to do pruning when I did a lot of trail work. So that's, you know, finding the best way to use an area with low impact on the plant community, but, you know, still letting, you know, people get in there and enjoy and recreate. So there are times when you might have to prune, and it can depend on the species, the best way to do it, and time of year. And then the actual cut itself is not as straightforward as a lot of road crews think. So yeah, we're talking about doing a whole program about that. And you know, some folks really do like that work. Some people really want to make their garden look a certain way and, you know, accentuate the natural features of like serviceberry, for example. You know, it's already a pretty graceful, upright, multi-stem shrub. But, you know, you can do some architectural prunes in there and, you know, make it look even crazier. So some folks love that, and you know, I get a kick out of pruning, but I will admit that I mostly have to do it for the ornamental older landscape plants, the non-native stuff that for whatever reason have been, you know, bred to look a certain way or are responding to the environment in a weird way, and they just need more guidance and more help sometimes. But somebody, what's that, Bill?
It's actually a trick question because there are some things that you need to trim. For instance, 9 bark has a lot of dead stalks, the older stalks. And so if you want those to look good, you really got to cut them out. Same with the twig dogwoods. If you want those, if you want to have your red twig dogwood be red, you got to go in and trim out the older stalks to get fresh stuff, beautyberry and some other things. But usually I only trim out the dead stuff or the really old ones to get some new growth and rejuvenation on them.
Yeah, you got to think about that dead stuff for safety purposes a lot of the time. If you're in your backyard, you know, out in the woods, it's like let your dead trees just be snags, let your dead branches just fall. But if we're talking about backyard gardening, you got to stay on top of those safety hazards more. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun to know that stuff and to play with your 9 bark, play with your red twig dogwood for sure. Somebody was asking us specifically about pruning a native honeysuckle vine, I'm assuming. Was that somewhere back in the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the native honeysuckles, you don't really have to prune it if you wanted to. If it outgrew its space or if you want to transplant it, move it, you can cut them basically all the way back and they'll sprout back out. So they can be pruned really heavy. You don't need to prune them really heavy, but it can be cut all the way back.
Scotty, is that for the vine or for the shrub, the Durvilla that they call the native?
I was talking about the vine right there. But I imagine you could cut back the mountain Durvilla pretty hard too. I wouldn't see as much need for it though.
Yeah. Gail is asking if we dig up the soil when we're seeding in the ground. And I would say this is a mistake I see a lot of my I've seen some of my coworkers make with native seeds. It's kind of tricky because you don't want to just throw it on compacted, beat up soil that's just bare, but you also don't want to bury it in the ground like vegetable seeds. So it's kind of a light scarification, and then making sure that you've got seed to soil contact. So a lot of people will walk over the area that they've seeded, or they'll do something to try and make sure those seeds actually get in the soil, but not deep down in it. It's just right on top. So, and then keeping them moist so they can germinate and not dry out.
Should you mulch over them?
I like to use pine straw mulch, if anything. Just a real light cover that will let sunlight through. We've had pretty good luck actually for some of our sites, like a bioretention, where we get a lot of water activity, moving seeds around. Throw seeds down on the fresh graded soil. So like a disturbance event, whatever it is, maybe you just dug up a giant honeysuckle bush. That'd be a great time to throw some seeds down. But yeah, we will throw seeds down and then put down an erosion matting, a biodegradable erosion matting. It'd be similar to just using some pine straw mulch. And if those seeds are getting a little sunlight through there, then they'll come right up through it. But yeah, I have never been a part. We're about to do a pretty exciting kind of grasslands installation, but I've never personally done like a bigger, acres grassland installation like that before. So I'm hoping I actually learn more about this soon. When you're doing a smaller area, it's a little easier to control the variables. But were you gonna say something, Scotty?
Yeah, I was gonna say that it depends on the location and what kind of plants you're wanting to do. If you're talking about kind of a woodland garden, you're throwing out woodland plant seeds. I wouldn't do any kind of raking or anything really. You could just throw them on top of the leaves. Even they'll get washed on the leaves and they'll sprout. But I was gonna say for like a grassland. If you're trying to get a grassland, especially with the grasses, they really like bare mineral soil to seed in. So they're adapted to, a fire coming through and burning that whole organic, the whole top layer to where it's just bare mineral soil. And that's what's really going to let the seed sprout. And a lot of seeds need light. If you look at the size of the seed, that can tell you a lot about what conditions it's going to need. The bigger the seed, the deeper in the soil it's going to need to be. If it's really small seeds like dust-like or like poppy seeds or anything smaller than that, it's going to need light to germinate. So you definitely don't want to bury it at all. But in general, I would say just, rake a little bit just to kind of rough up the ground and, and then let nature take its course. So. But it does depend on like what kind of condition. If you're going for a woodland versus a grassland, I think you're going to have different, you'll want to have different levels of, bare earth showing. So.
Yeah, great point. Let's see. Yeah, I was going to circle back to sort of talking about planting. Something kind of fun that I learned when I was starting out as a gardener was doing, I call it live stakes now, but just vegetative propagation, where you can, learn that some species just take really well to this. And when they're dormant in the winter, you could cut a branch off of, say, a button bush and just stick it in the ground. So like my coworkers and I have learned a lot more about this doing stream bank restorations. So a live stake can be used for not just the fact that it's going to grow roots and start stabilizing that soil, but sometimes when people are actually building new streams or doing a stream restoration, they had to like move a channel in the winter. That's really scary because there's so little holding that soil together. But a live stake, just a stick in the ground, will help kind of hold that together even before its roots are growing. So that's just really fun to play with, and there's a lot of different species you can try that with. So another fun project in your yard this time of year. Just elderberry. We were talking about dogwood, red twig dogwood, pretty good ones. But yeah, if anybody's got stream bank work that they want to talk about, I'm happy to talk about that tonight too. I'm looking at my list.
Well, how about mulching? So how about mulching? Now's a great time of year to mulch. Be sure not to put too much mulch over your perennials or anything. But generally now in the winter is the time when I'm remulching my beds. I only do it every couple of years, but especially if you're using a lot of leaves, if you're keeping all your leaves, you'll have to use mulch a lot less often if you're even using it at all. But yeah, now's a good time to be mulching. Just a good little 2-inch layer at most, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Allison had raised her hand. I'm not sure if she still has a question.
Yeah, what's up, Allison?
Well, there was a little bit of a lull, and I wanted to tell y'all something good that happened today. In the town of Walden on Signal Mountain, we have a new mayor.
Yeah.
Lee Davis, and he has contacted Sally Ford about starting several native plant areas in the public places on Signal Mountain. So I don't know if anybody wants to get involved in it. That's not on the list, but it's something to celebrate in this day of COVID when we are all searching for something good. So
yeah, that's great news.
That is great news.
Yeah, native plants can be a lot easier to take care of for municipalities. So takes a little different knowledge, but it makes a lot of sense for public lands, and it's kind of a cultural shift to get people thinking that way. People are used to the traditional landscape look, and just can't find people to do that different horticultural work sometimes. But I'm glad to hear that they want to give it a shot.
Well, I think the education aspect of it is the most exciting, that people will see things that are they look nice, and they'll say, oh wow, what's that? And then we can expand the reach. So if anybody's interested that lives on or near the mountain and they want on the list, just let me know.
Sounds great.
Yeah, that's actually related, I think, because if you're trying to convert people to native plants, you mentioned tidiness, and mulching can actually really help with that. So this is a good time of year to kind of take a look at your sites, take a look at your garden, and think, would an edge make this look more recognizable? Like, I have to think about public perception a lot. in your own backyards, you can make it look however you want. But if you are interested in doing little projects like that, the winter is a great time to work. It's so much easier than the dead of summer to not have to worry about sweating to death. But yeah, edging projects, little building projects like a retaining wall, something like that. This is a great time of year to take those kinds of things on.
Is this a good time of year to transplant sedges?
Yeah.
Yep. It's a great time.
Okay, yeah, so that would be if people have monkey grass and you say, well, you know what? So, okay, well, thank you all.
Yeah, great time of year to look at your monkey grass and think about what else you might want to have there. But yeah, we mentioned earlier, just, this is a great time to be researching and reading and even looking at the plants you already have and just learning more about them. But yeah, designing a new bed for next year, learning your sedges. So many sedges.
Yeah, another thing with winter, just looking at your environmental conditions, because they're going to be a lot different than they are in the summer. So take note of where the sun's at during the winter. Take note about how much runoff you have. There's generally going to be a lot more runoff in the winter because we got more rain. And take a look at how moist the soil is. There's a spot in my yard that you think would make just a great garden, and during the summer it's pretty dry, but then in the winter it's inundated in water. So that's important to know. If if I just got to that house, which I did actually this year, I got to the house and I look at the summer environmental conditions and they're much different than winter environmental conditions. So it's good to take note of what's going on in the winter too. Especially see where your wet spots are in your yard and where there's a lot of erosion and.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree. This is, take stock of the water action in your yard. And, as somebody that thinks about stormwater and water pollution a lot, when you get so much more rain in the winter, that is the best time to see, am I shedding water off of my property? Like, do I have a lot of water leaving my land, getting out into the road? Is it washing into my neighbor's property? If you have a stream or a creek, are you adding a lot of water to that water body through surface flow, or is everything soaking into the ground? So for water quality purposes, for protecting our local waterways, it's best if we can all absorb water as much as we can onto our land, and native plants can really help with that. So if you feel like you're shedding a lot of water, this would be a great time of year to think about, how could I build a rain garden on my property? How could I have more deep-rooted native grasses that would keep my soil really fluffy and absorbative? Yeah, I do this every winter. I walk around on a really rainy day and I think, man, I really got to work on this drainage back here. Or oh, the water's moving a new way. I better try to fix that again. So yeah, it's 7:05. I feel like a lot of folks are signing off, getting a lot of thank yous. It's great to hear. We got any
I'll add mine. Thank you both for coming tonight and talking about this. I hope everyone got at least some part of their questions touched on.
Yeah, any other lingering thoughts or ideas or announcements? I'm really glad we could do this. I like the format, and I feel like a lot of folks have similar questions, and it's it's not necessarily stuff you can make a whole presentation out of, but it's nice to just be able to chat about it.
Yeah.
You're welcome to do them anytime. We
Thanks for
appreciate it.
having me, y'all. And also for everyone, if you can email me anytime you want about anything at all. If you ever have any questions, it doesn't matter. Send me an email. My email is scotty@reflectionwriting.org. I'll go ahead and write that in here. But
I got it. Here you go. Uh-oh, you muted yourself.
yeah,
There you
anyway,
go.
sorry. But that's what I'm here for. So yeah, feel free to shoot me an email anytime with any questions. I'll be happy to answer, help you out any way I can.
And I'll second that. So my email's in there too.
And you can always email, you can always email tnvalleywildones@gmail.com if you have questions, or if you want resources and need to find someone else. So yeah, we're always happy to answer emails and questions.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody.
All right, thanks, y'all.
Stay safe out there.
Have a good night.
All right, see y'all later.
Bye.